Dr. Ethan Williams stood in the ER, arms crossed, as Marcus Taylor lay on the gurney, blood dripping from his side. "Find someone else," Dr. Williams said coldly. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the bustling emergency room. Nurses and orderlies rushed past, their shoes squeaking against the polished floor. Amid the chaos, Dr. Williams's crisp white coat remained pristine, a stark contrast to the growing crimson stain on Marcus's shirt. Alyssa Taylor gripped her husband's hand, her eyes darting between Marcus and the retreating figure of Dr. Williams. "Please," she called out, her voice cracking. "He needs help." Dr. Williams paused, turning slightly, his lip curled in disdain. "I'm sure one of the residents can handle it. I have more pressing matters." Marcus winced, his breath coming in short gasps. Despite the pain etched across his face, his voice remained steady. "It's okay, Alyssa. We'll find someone else." Alyssa's jaw clenched. She stood, her posture rigid with determination. "No, it's not okay. You need immediate attention, and he's the best surgeon here." As Dr. Williams disappeared around the corner, Alyssa flagged down a passing nurse. "Excuse me, we need help. My husband Dash." The nurse, her name tag reading Sarah, glanced at Marcus, then at the retreating form of Dr. Williams. Her eyes widened in recognition. "I'm sorry, ma'am. If Dr. Williams has declined to treat your husband, I can't override his decision. Let me find someone else." Alyssa's frustration mounted. "But he's bleeding. Can't you see that?" Sarah's expression softened. "I understand, but Dash—" "No, you don't understand," Alyssa interrupted, her voice rising. "This is blatant discrimination. My husband needs help now." The commotion drew the attention of Dr. Lisa Hall, a young resident passing through the ER. She approached cautiously, her brow furrowed with concern. "Is everything all right here?" Alyssa turned to Dr. Hall, desperation evident in her voice. "My husband was in an accident. He needs surgery, but Dr. Williams refused to treat him. Please, can you help us?" Dr. Hall hesitated, her gaze shifting between Marcus and the direction Dr. Williams had gone. "I'm not authorized to perform that level of surgery, but let me take a look at his chart." As Dr. Hall reviewed Marcus's information, her eyes widened. She looked up at Marcus, then back at the chart. "Mr. Taylor, your Dash." Marcus raised a hand, cutting her off. "Please, just Marcus." "And yes, I am. But that doesn't matter right now. What matters is getting the care I need." Dr. Hall nodded, a mix of admiration and concern in her eyes. "Of course. I'll see what I can do." As Dr. Hall hurried off, Nurse James approached the gurney. His experienced eyes quickly assessed Marcus's condition. Without a word, he began cleaning and dressing the wound. "Thank you," Marcus said softly. Nurse James offered a grim smile. "It's not much, but it'll help until we can get you proper treatment." Alyssa paced beside the gurney, her phone pressed to her ear. "Evelyn, it's Alyssa Taylor. We have a situation at the hospital. Marcus, he's been hurt, and Dr. Williams refused to treat him." "Yes, that Dr. Williams. We need your help." As Alyssa spoke, Dr. Williams reappeared, his face a mask of irritation. "I thought I made myself clear. This patient doesn't require my attention." Alyssa whirled on him, her eyes blazing. "How dare you? You haven't even examined him. This is a clear violation of your oath as a doctor." Dr. Williams sneered. "I don't need to examine him to know that my skills are better utilized elsewhere. Perhaps if your husband had chosen a more reputable hospital, he'd receive the care you seem to think he deserves." Marcus struggled to sit up, his voice strained but resolute. "Dr. Williams, I understand you're a busy man, but I assure you, I have every right to be here and to receive proper care." "Rights." Dr. Williams scoffed. "This hospital caters to a certain caliber of patient. I'm sure you understand." The air in the ER seemed to thicken, the tension palpable. Nearby staff members exchanged uneasy glances, their discomfort evident. Alyssa stepped forward, her voice low and dangerous. "Dr. Williams, I suggest you reconsider your position. Unless you want the board to hear about this blatant act of discrimination. Dr. Williams's eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me?" "No," came a stern voice from behind him. "But I am." Evelyn Carter strode into the ER, flanked by several members of the hospital board. Her presence commanded attention, her gaze fixed on Dr. Williams. "Evelyn," Dr. Williams started, his tone suddenly conciliatory. "This is all a misunderstanding. I was simply Dash." Evelyn held up a hand, silencing him. "Save it, Ethan. I've heard enough." She turned to Marcus, her expression softening. "Mr. Taylor, on behalf of the hospital, I apologize for this disgraceful treatment." Dr. Williams's face paled. "Mr. Taylor, as in?" "As in Marcus Taylor," Evelyn confirmed, her voice sharp. "One of our most generous donors and a tireless advocate for healthcare equality. The very man whose contributions have funded much of your research, Dr. Williams." The color drained from Dr. Williams's face as the realization hit him. He stammered, I had no idea. If I had known Dash. If you had known." Alyssa interjected, her voice trembling with anger. "So you're saying you would have treated him differently if you knew who he was?" "That's exactly the problem." Marcus reached out, grasping Alyssa's hand. Despite his pain, his voice remained calm. "It's all right, Alyssa. What's done is done. What matters now is ensuring this doesn't happen to anyone else." Evelyn nodded, her expression grim. "Rest assured it won't. Dr. Williams, you're suspended pending a full investigation. Dr. Hall, please take over Mr. Taylor's care immediately." As Dr. Hall rushed to Marcus's side, the ER erupted into a flurry of activity. Nurses and doctors swarmed around the gurney, prepping Marcus for surgery. Dr. Williams stood frozen, watching as his carefully constructed world began to crumble. "You can't do this," he muttered. "Do you know who I am?" Evelyn's gaze was ice cold. "I know exactly who you are, Ethan. The question is, do you?" As Marcus was wheeled towards the operating room, he caught Dr. Williams's eye. There was no anger in his gaze, only a profound sadness. "I hope you learn from this, Doctor. There's so much more to healing than just treating wounds." The doors swung shut behind Marcus, leaving Dr. Williams standing alone in the suddenly quiet ER. The weight of his actions pressed down on him. The consequences of his prejudice laid bare for all to see. Nurse James approached, his voice low. "You know, Doc, I've worked here for 20 years. Seen all kinds of people come through those doors. Rich, poor, black, white. Pain doesn't discriminate. Neither should we." Dr. Williams opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. For the first time in his illustrious career, he found himself speechless. As the gravity of the situation settled over the ER, a sense of change hung in the air. The events of the day had exposed a deep-rooted problem, one that could no longer be ignored. And in the operating room, as Dr. Hall prepared to save Marcus's life, the first steps towards a more equitable future were being taken. But the story was far from over. As Alyssa paced outside the OR, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID read Lisa Williams. Little did anyone know, this call would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything Dr. Williams thought he knew about himself and the world around him. The operating room buzzed with tense energy as Dr. Lisa Hall prepared to operate on Marcus Taylor. Alyssa paced outside, her fingers twisting the gold band on her left hand. Evelyn Carter stood nearby, her usual composed demeanor cracking under the weight of the situation. "This is unacceptable," Evelyn muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "I can't believe we let it get this far." Alyssa paused her pacing. "What do you mean?" Evelyn sighed, her shoulders sagging. "Marcus has been warning us about systemic issues for years. We listened, but I guess we didn't hear." Before Alyssa could respond, Dr. Williams strode down the hallway, his face a mask of indignation. "This is ridiculous. You can't seriously be considering Dash." "Considering what, Ethan?" Evelyn's voice cut like steel. "Considering holding you accountable for your actions." Dr. Williams sneered. "My actions? I made a judgment call based on the information available to me. A judgment call. Alyssa's voice trembled with rage. You refuse to even look at my husband. Mrs. Taylor, I understand you're upset, but dash. No, you don't understand, Alyssa interrupted. You don't understand what it's like to watch your husband bleed while a doctor who took an oath to help people walks away. Dr. Williams's face flushed. Now, see here, dash. No, you see here, Evelyn interjected. Your actions today have put this hospital at risk. Do you have any idea of the legal ramifications? Dr. Williams scoffed. Legal ramifications. Over one patient. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. One patient who happens to be a civil rights attorney and has been gathering evidence of discriminatory practices in our hospital for months. The color drained from Dr. Williams's face. What? That's right, Evelyn continued. Marcus Taylor has been working on a case against this hospital. Your refusal to treat him today might just be the smoking gun he needs. Dr. Williams stumbled back, his arrogance crumbling. I had no idea. Of course you didn't, Alyssa spat, because you never bothered to look past the color of his skin. The tense conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the operating room. Alarms blared and voices raised in urgency. He's coding. Dr. Hall's voice carried through the door. Alyssa's heart stopped. She lunged for the door, but a nurse held her back. Let me in, Marcus. Dr. Williams, momentarily forgetting his own predicament, moved towards the operating room. I can help dash. Evelyn's hand on his chest stopped him cold. You've done enough, Ethan. Stay out of this. Inside the operating room, Dr. Hall worked feverishly to stabilize Marcus. Come on, Mr. Taylor. Stay with us. Nurse James assisted, his experienced hands moving with precision. BP's dropping. We're losing him, Doctor. Dr. Hall gritted her teeth. Not on my watch. Charge to 300. Clear. Marcus's body jerked as the defibrillator sent a shock through his system. The monitor continued its ominous monotone. Again. Dr. Hall commanded. Charge to 360. Clear. Another shock. Another moment of breathless anticipation. Beep, beep, beep. The room collectively exhaled as Marcus's heartbeat stabilized. Outside, Alyssa sagged against a wall, tears streaming down her face. Evelyn placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Dr. Williams stood frozen, the gravity of the situation finally sinking in. His actions had nearly cost a man his life. A man who, by all accounts, had dedicated his life to fighting for equality and justice. As the crisis in the operating room subsided, attention turned back to Dr. Williams. Evelyn's voice was cold as she addressed him. Ethan, you're suspended pending a full investigation. I suggest you leave the premises immediately. Dr. Williams opened his mouth to protest, but the words died on his lips. He turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Hours later, as Marcus recovered in the ICU, Alyssa sat by his bedside, holding his hand. Dr. Hall entered the room, her face etched with exhaustion but relief. How is he? Alyssa asked, her voice hoarse from crying. Dr. Hall smiled softly. He's stable. The surgery was successful. He's going to need time to recover, but he's out of danger. Alyssa let out a shaky breath. Thank you, doctor, for everything. Dr. Hall nodded, then hesitated. Mrs. Taylor, there's something you should know. When I was reviewing Mr. Taylor's medical history, I noticed, well, it seems he's been admitted to various hospitals across the city multiple times over the past year. Always with minor injuries, always under different names. Alyssa's eyes widened. What are you saying? I think, Dr. Hall said carefully, your husband has been gathering evidence of discriminatory practices in healthcare for a long time. He's been putting himself at risk to expose these issues. Alyssa closed her eyes, a mix of pride and fear washing over her. That sounds like Marcus, always fighting for what's right, no matter the cost. As they spoke, Evelyn entered the room, her face grave. Alyssa, Dr. Hall, we need to talk. The board has been in emergency meetings all day. What happened with Dr. Williams? It's just the tip of the iceberg. Alyssa straightened in her chair. What do you mean? Evelyn sighed. We've uncovered a pattern of discriminatory practices throughout the hospital. It's not just Dr. Williams. It's systemic. Dr. Hall's face paled. How bad is it? Bad enough that we're facing a potential class action lawsuit, Evelyn replied. And Marcus Taylor's case could be the linchpin that brings it all crashing down. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The hospital they had all dedicated their lives to was on the brink of a scandal that could destroy it. Alyssa's voice broke the silence. So what happens now? Evelyn's eyes met hers, determination shining through. Now, we fix it. We tear it all down and rebuild if we have to, but we make it right. As they discussed the path forward, none of them noticed Marcus's eyes flutter open. He listened silently, a small smile playing on his lips. His plan had worked, perhaps better than he had ever imagined. The change he had fought so hard for was finally within reach. But as Marcus drifted back to sleep, a new complication was brewing across town. Dr. Williams, reeling from his suspension, received a frantic phone call. His estranged daughter, Lisa, had been in a serious car accident. The only hospital that could treat her in time was one he had long criticized and avoided, a hospital that primarily served the black community. As Dr. Williams raced across town, his world spinning out of control, he had no idea that his greatest challenge, and perhaps his shot at redemption, was waiting for him in the most unexpected place. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force Dr. Williams to face his prejudices head-on and potentially change the course of not just his life, but the entire healthcare system in their city. The real battle was just beginning. Dr. Ethan Williams's world spun as he raced through the city, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The frantic call from a hospital about Lisa's accident replayed in his mind, each word a dagger to his heart. He screeched to a halt outside Mercy General, a rundown facility he'd openly criticized for years. The irony wasn't lost on him as he burst through the doors, desperation etched on his face. "My daughter," he gasped at the receptionist. "Lisa Williams. Where is she?" The woman's eyes widened in recognition. "Dr. Williams, she's in surgery. 3rd floor." Williams sprinted for the elevator, his heart pounding. As the doors opened on the 3rd floor, he collided with a familiar face. Nathaniel. Dr. Nathaniel Evans stood before him, his expression a mix of surprise and something harder to read. "Dr. Williams, I didn't expect to see you here." "My daughter," Williams stammered. "Lisa. Is she Dash? She's in surgery." Evans cut him off. "It's touch and go. We're doing everything we can." Williams felt the floor tilt beneath him. "You're operating on her." Evans's jaw tightened. "Is that a problem?" The words hung between them, heavy with years of unspoken tension. Williams opened his mouth, then closed it, shame washing over him. "No," he finally managed. "No problem. Just, please, save her." Evans's expression softened slightly. "I'll do my best. That's all any of us can do." As Evans turned to leave, Williams called out, "Nathaniel, Dash." "Not now, Dr. Williams," Evans said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Your daughter needs me." Williams watched him go, feeling more helpless than he ever had in his life. He slumped into a waiting room chair, his head in his hands. Hours passed like years. Williams paced, prayed, and pleaded with any higher power that might be listening. The irony of his situation wasn't lost on him. Here he was, utterly dependent on a hospital and a doctor he dismissed for years. Finally, Evans emerged from the OR, his scrubs stained with blood. Williams leapt to his feet, his heart in his throat. "She's stable," Evans said, exhaustion evident in his voice. "It was touch and go for a while, but she's a fighter." Relief flooded Williams, nearly bringing him to his knees. "Thank you," he whispered. "Nathaniel, I can't begin to dash." Evans held up a hand. "Don't thank me yet. She's not out of the woods. The next 24 hours are critical." Williams nodded, swallowing hard. "Can I see her?" "She's in recovery. I'll have a nurse come get you when she's settled in ICU." As Evans turned to leave, Williams found his voice again. "Nathaniel, I know I have no right to ask, but why? After everything I've done, everything I've said about this hospital, about you?" Evans paused, his back to Williams. When he spoke, his voice was low and controlled. "Because unlike you, Dr. Williams, I took an oath to help all patients, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other patients to attend to." The words hit Williams like a physical blow. He watched Evans walk away, the weight of his actions pressing down on him like never before. Hours later, as Williams sat by Lisa's bedside, holding her hand and listening to the steady beep of monitors, his phone buzzed. It was Evelyn Carter. "Ethan." Her voice was tight. "I just heard about Lisa. How is she?" "Stable," Williams replied, his voice hoarse. "Thanks to Dr. Evans." There was a pause on the other end. "Ethan, there's something you need to know. It's about Marcus Taylor." Williams felt a chill run down his spine. "What about him?" "He's awake, and he's talking to the press." Williams closed his eyes, bracing for the worst. "But it's not what you think," Evelyn continued. He's defending you." "What?" Williams's eyes snapped open. "He's talking about systemic issues in healthcare, yes. But he's also talking about the pressure doctors face, the impossible decisions. He's calling for reform, not retribution." Williams felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him once again. "I don't understand. After what I did." "I don't fully understand it either," Evelyn admitted. "But I think you need to talk to him, when you can." As Williams hung up, he looked at his daughter's pale face, then out the window at the bustling hospital beyond. For the first time in his career, he saw not a substandard facility, but a place of healing, of hope. A knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. It was Evans. "Dr. Williams," he said, his voice professional but non-kind. "I need to check on Lisa." Williams nodded, standing to give Evans room. As he watched the younger doctor examine his daughter with gentle, expert hands, something broke inside him. "I'm sorry," he blurted out. Evans paused, looking up in surprise. "For everything," Williams continued, the words tumbling out. "For the way I treated you, the things I said. You were one of the most promising residents I'd ever seen, and I let my prejudices blind me. I drove you away, and now you've saved my daughter's life." Evans was silent for a long moment, his face unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "Apology accepted, Dr. Williams. But it's not me you need to make things right with. It's every patient you've turned away, every life you've deemed less worthy of your skills." Williams nodded, shame and determination warring within him. "I know, and I will. I have to." As Evans finished his examination and turned to leave, he paused at the door. "You know, Dr. Williams, it's never too late to learn, to change. The question is, are you willing to do the work?" The question hung in the air long after Evans had gone. Williams looked at his daughter, then out at the hospital beyond. He thought of Marcus Taylor, of Nathaniel Evans, of all the lives he'd touched, for better or worse, throughout his career. In that moment, Dr. Ethan Williams made a decision that would change not just his life, but the lives of countless others. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he never thought he'd call. "Mr. Taylor, it's Dr. Williams. I need your help." As the sun rose over the city, casting long shadows through the hospital windows, a new chapter was beginning. For Dr. Williams, for Mercy General, and for a healthcare system long overdue for change. The road ahead would be long and difficult, filled with challenges and setbacks. But as Williams looked at his daughter's face, peaceful in sleep, he knew that this was a journey he had to take. Not just for Lisa, or for himself, but for every patient who deserved better than the system he'd been a part of for so long. "I'm ready to learn," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "I'm ready to heal." And with those words, the real work began. The sun crept over the horizon, casting a warm glow through the windows of Mercy General. Dr. Ethan Williams stood in the hallway, his shoulders slumped, watching as his daughter Lisa slept peacefully. The steady beep of her heart monitor was a constant reminder of how close he'd come to losing everything. A gentle knock, on the door frame startled him. Dr. Nathaniel Evans stood there, his face etched with exhaustion, but eyes bright with determination. "Dr. Williams," Evans said, his voice low. "We need to talk." Williams nodded, following Evans to a small conference room. As they sat, the weight of their shared history hung heavy between them. "I've been thinking about what you said," Evans began, "about wanting to make things right." Williams leaned forward, hope flickering in his chest. "I meant every word, Nathaniel. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to do better. I need to do better." Evans studied him for a long moment. "It won't be easy. You've built a career on privilege and prejudice. Dismantling that, it's going to hurt." "I know," Williams whispered, "but I'm ready. Whatever it takes." A ghost of a smile played on Evans's lips. "Good, because I have a proposition for you." As Evans laid out his plan, Williams felt a mix of terror and exhilaration. It was audacious, potentially career-ending, but also, right, "You're talking about completely overhauling the system," Williams breathed. Evans nodded. "It's time, Dr. Williams, and we need someone on the inside to make it happen." Williams stood, pacing the small room. "The board will fight this tooth and nail. My colleagues, I'll be a pariah." "Probably," Evans agreed. "But isn't that a small price to pay for real change?" Williams stopped, looking out the window at the city awakening below. He thought of Marcus Taylor, of the countless patients he'd dismissed over the years, of Lisa, lying in that hospital bed. "I'm in," he said, turning back to Evans. "Where do we start?" The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Williams, working alongside Evans and Marcus Taylor, began the painstaking process of documenting every instance of discrimination and malpractice they could find. It was grueling, heartbreaking work, but with each revelation, Williams felt a piece of his old self falling away. The day they presented their findings to the hospital board was one Williams would never forget. The room was packed, tension crackling in the air like electricity. Evelyn Carter sat at the head of the table, her face a mask of professionalism. But as Williams laid out their case, he saw the shock and dismay in her eyes. "This is unprecedented," she said when he finished. "Dr. Williams, you realize what you're proposing would fundamentally change how we operate." Williams nodded. "I do, and it's long overdue." One of the board members, Dr. Richard Simmons, leaned forward, his face red with anger. "This is preposterous. You're talking about dismantling decades of established practice based on what? The word of a disgraced surgeon and a handful of malcontents." Williams felt his old anger rising, but before he could respond, a calm voice cut through the tension. "Based on evidence, Dr. Simmons, irrefutable evidence of systemic discrimination and malpractice." Marcus Taylor stood in the doorway, Alyssa by his side. The room fell silent as he walked to the front, placing a thick folder on the table. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Marcus said, his voice steady, "what Dr. Williams and Dr. Evans have presented is just the tip of the iceberg. In this folder, you'll find detailed accounts from patients, staff, and even some of your own members documenting years of discriminatory practices." Evelyn Carter reached for the folder with trembling hands. As she flipped through the pages, her face paled. "Mr. Taylor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "this is devastating." Marcus nodded. "It is. But it's also an opportunity to do better, to be better." The room erupted into chaos, board members arguing loudly. But Williams barely heard them. His eyes were fixed on Marcus, on the quiet strength radiating from the man he'd once dismissed so callously. Hours later, as the sun set over the city, the board emerged with their decision. The hospital would undergo a complete overhaul, with new policies and practices designed to ensure equitable care for all patients. Dr. Williams would lead the transition team, working alongside Dr. Evans and a committee of community representatives. As the news spread, Williams found himself at the center of a media storm. Some hailed him as a hero, others branded him a traitor. But for the first time in his career, he found he didn't care about the accolades or the criticism. He had work to do. Weeks turned into months. The changes were hard-fought, with resistance at every turn. But slowly, surely, things began to shift. New doctors were hired, representing a diverse range of backgrounds and experiences. Training programs were implemented to address unconscious bias. Community outreach efforts expanded, bringing quality care to underserved neighborhoods. And through it all, Williams found himself learning, growing, changing in ways he never thought possible. 1 year to the day after Marcus Taylor had first been wheeled into the ER, Williams stood outside the newly renovated clinic attached to Mercy General. A crowd had gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, a mix of hospital staff, community members, and media. As Williams stepped up to the podium, he caught sight of familiar faces in the crowd. Marcus and Alyssa Taylor, smiling proudly. Dr. Evans, standing tall and confident. And there, in the front row, Lisa Williams, her eyes shining with tears of pride. Williams cleared his throat, suddenly overwhelmed. "A year ago," he began, his voice shaky, "I stood in an ER not far from here and made a decision that changed my life. I chose arrogance over compassion, prejudice over humanity. It was the worst mistake of my career, but also the best thing that ever happened to me." A hush fell over the crowd as he continued, "Because that mistake led me here, to this moment, to a place where we can truly say that every life matters, every patient deserves our best. It's been a long, hard road, and we're not done yet. But today, we take another step forward." As he cut the ribbon, the crowd erupted in cheers. Williams felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Marcus Taylor standing beside him. "You did good, Doc," Marcus said, a smile playing on his lips. Williams shook his head. "We did good. All of us." As the crowd began to disperse, Williams found himself alone for a moment. He looked at the clinic, at the shining new sign that read Taylor Evans Community Health Center, and felt a sense of peace wash over him. For the first time, he murmured to himself, "I'm finally learning how to heal." And with those words, Dr. Ethan Williams stepped through the doors of the clinic, ready to begin the next chapter of his journey. A journey of redemption, of growth, and of true healing. For himself, for his patients, and for a community long overdue for change.